Okay, welcome everybody. This is VCS 24 presentation for Remote Falcon with James Vance. As I said earlier, please keep your mics turned off unless you're asking a question, and please keep your video turned off during the presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to you, James, and have at it.
All right, thanks, Andy. Yeah, so as you mentioned, if you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to just ask. I don't mind being interrupted. Yeah, we'll take it away. Like you said, my name's James Vance, and I'll be doing the presentation today on Remote Falcon. So first of all, to cover what is Remote Falcon, for those of you who may not be familiar with what it is or have never heard of it. So Remote Falcon is actually a web application that you can sign up for that allows viewers to interact with your light show. And they can do that by either voting on sequences that you have on your display, or by using more of a jukebox style. And so it kind of puts a lot of the control into your viewer's hand to make it more interactive for them. And it is free to use. And so it's kind of, in this particular hobby, things can get expensive. And so sometimes it's nice to have something out there that doesn't cost anything out of pocket. So what to expect from the presentation? I'm going to try to keep it high level. I don't want to get too much into some of the more advanced settings, simply because you might not have time to do that. And so what I'll be covering is just how to sign up, setting up the plugin. I'll only be covering Falcon Player plugin setup for this. It does work with Xschedule, but I won't be covering that in this presentation. And then some of the common settings that you can go through, and just to kind of tailor Remote Falcon to suit your needs. A little bit about me. So I live in Northwest Arkansas. I got into holiday lighting in 2015, and actually started with in an apartment. So I had a single strip of LEDs on the door and a pixel inside of a pumpkin. And I did one little Halloween show, and then as most of you can understand, it kind of grew from there. And then I decided I wanted to find a way to incorporate the viewers a little bit more. And in 2018, I had the idea to write Remote Falcon. And back then, it was a very, very early, terrible version, which I have proof of. I was able to come across this screenshot of what, for those of you who've used Remote Falcon before and are familiar kind of with the user interface, then you'll know how extremely old this looks. So it was a white background of black text. And so it's really come a long way since it was originally released in 2019. And more personal side, so I do work as a staff software engineer for Walmart. Some of you may have heard of them. I don't know. And so that's what I do for my 9 to 5. Before I start, I do want to throw out some helpful links. So the Remote Falcon website is pretty easy to find. It's just remotefalcon.com. And that is where we're going to be spending most of our time during the presentation. There is also a Facebook group, facebook.com/group/Remote Falcon. There's a lot of super helpful and nice people in there. And so if there's any questions that we're not able to get to during the presentation, then feel free to join the group, and you'll definitely get the help that you need there. If you don't like Facebook, there is also a documentation website for Remote Falcon. So it's docs.remotefalcon.com. And that covers everything from signing up to even the most advanced settings. And something that I'll try to touch on at the end is the ability to actually run Remote Falcon on your own server or your own computer, however you want to do it. So with that being said, we will just jump right into the demo itself. So when you go to remotefalcon.com, This is the web page that will show up. And right here, we have a link to the documentation. And signing up is a simple process. So you put in first name, last name, and then the important part here is what you want your show name to be. And so this has to be unique. So you can't share a show name with somebody else, because when you sign up, the show name that you use, it actually creates a website for you using that show name, which I'll show you in a little bit. And so it does have to be a unique name. And then email address and password. You'll get an email to whatever email address you use to verify the email. And then once you do that, you're ready to sign in. And I'll go ahead and sign into my test account here. And I'm going to put this in the chat here. So in the chat, I put a link to the web page that we'll be working from in this presentation. Once it's up, there's nothing there right now because we're going to cover that. Once it's up, feel free to go to it, click around, look at different things. Once you sign in, the first thing you'll come to is a dashboard. And after signing up, the dashboard isn't going to mean a whole lot. But once you start getting sequences in there and people start making requests and stuff like that, then this will start to populate with information, how many viewers you get to your site, how many sequence requests you get. So real quick, I'm just going to cover a couple of these over here. So the Remote Falcon settings is the main place where you go to kind of tell Remote Falcon how you want it to work. I'll go through some more of these in detail when we're actually doing our setup, but we do have options for jukebox style and for voting style. And so each one of these have different settings that you can do. Our viewer page. So this is what the viewer will actually see. So if you went to the vcsdemo.remotefalcon.com, you may have noticed there's nothing there. And that's because we don't actually have a web page set up. And so once we get our web page set up, then the viewer will actually have something to see. And that all happens in here. And then in our sequences, I'm actually going to delete all these so we can start from scratch. So right now there's nothing in here. And so we'll cover how to actually get sequences onto this page that your viewers will use to make their requests or to vote. When you first sign up, the important place to go to is over here in your account settings. You'll also notice there's a link to your show page. So this is what your viewers are going to go to. This is the link that you will give them that will allow them to place their requests or to vote. And so clicking on this will open up this blank page, which is, if you're on there, this is what you're seeing because we don't have anything set up just yet. It's hidden behind this bar. There we go. All right. So account settings is the first place where you want to go once you get your account created. And this is the starting point for actually setting up Remote Falcon. So getting into the web application is the first step. You'll also need, depending on if you're using Falcon Player Xschedule, you're going to need to download the plugin that syncs with the Remote Falcon website. And so the plugin is how Falcon Player knows what Remote Falcon is doing and vice versa. So when a viewer makes a request, it's how Falcon Player actually gets that request and plays it. And if you attended Dan's presentation earlier on plugins and scripts, then you should be familiar with this already. But in Plugin Manager, there will be a whole list of plugins that you can download, and they're all in alphabetical order. And to save time, I've already downloaded the Remote Falcon plugin. And so once it's installed, then the link to Remote Falcon will show up underneath your content setup. And your initial configuration is going to happen inside of this plugin. So when we go to the Remote Falcon plugin, you can see there's some initial things that need to be added. And then we have some advanced settings. So the advanced settings I'm not going to cover just for sake of time. But you'll notice the very first thing we have to put in here is a remote token or a show token. And that is something that can be found under your account settings whenever you sign in and under account. So the token is unique across every show, and it is how the Falcon Player plugin finds your show and knows which one to talk to. So it's really important that you don't give anybody the show token, which is why I mask it out here. Because if somebody enters your show token into their Falcon Player or X schedule, they can actually take control of your show. And so you don't want that to happen. And so the first step is to copy this token. And then back over in the plugin, we just paste it in there, and we can see that the remote token was saved. So now the plugin is able to communicate with your actual show that you have set up in Remote Falcon. And as you notice, when we went to sequences, there's nothing there. So kind of the next logical step would be to put some sequences into Remote Falcon. And so back in Falcon Player, the way you want to do this is you actually want to have a separate playlist that is specifically for Remote Falcon. And so this one playlist will actually have everything in it that you want your viewers to be able to interact with. And so you can see in here, I have 6 sequences that I want my viewers to actually be able to see and either vote on or request. And then aside from that, I have a separate show playlist that I schedule or have running when there's no requests or votes being made. And so let's get this Remote Falcon, the sequences in this Remote Falcon playlist put into Remote Falcon for our show. So if we go back to our plugin, see there's a section here for Remote Playlist. And so we have both of them that show up in here. So we're going to select Remote Falcon and then sync that with RF. And so we can see that the remote playlist was saved. And if we come back over here and refresh, we can now see we have all 6 of our sequences inside Remote Falcon. And so just to spend a little bit of time on this before we head over to the viewer page, if you click on one of these sequences, we do have some different options, which we'll cover more in detail. So you can change the display name. So this is actually how it would look on your viewer page. And you can set different things such as artist. You can have an image for it and categories, and then the ability to group sequences. But in order to see how that works, we will want to create a viewer page so something actually shows up when we go to this this site here. So back over on viewer page, we can see we don't have any, so we will actually create a new viewer page. And right now, there are 5 different templates that you can start from. And so if you want to see what those templates look like, then we can go over to viewer page templates, and each one of them will pull up a preview of what that will of what the page will look like whenever you create it. And so we have a Halloween one here. We have several Christmas. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to, since Halloween's next, we'll go ahead and create a new viewer page using this purple Halloween template. So we'll select the template from here and we will just name it Halloween and then create page. Now, if you are not familiar with HTML, this can be overwhelming at first. But what happens is the HTML code that gets showed here is the same thing that gets displayed on our site. So if we go back to our page, not yet. But this HTML is what will show on the page. And everything is pretty well documented as far as the styling and things go. And really the only things you have to change a lot of times are things like your show's name, the show hours that get run. So the templates are built out enough that that you can either keep it similar to what the template is, or you can create your own page completely from scratch. So there's really no limitation to what you can do here. And so we're going to save the viewer page, but you'll notice that nothing still shows up on here. And that is because we have to go to our settings under viewer page and tell it what viewer page we want to be active. So you can have multiple viewer pages set up for Halloween, for Christmas, or for any other holidays or events that you might do light shows for. And this is how you tell Remote Falcon which page it is you want to do. And so if we go back, now we can see that our site has this nice page on it where we changed our show name. And let's go back to our viewer page. Let's say we want to change the year on this. So we're going to change that to 2024 and save it. And when we can come back, we can see that it updates. Now, if you don't want to continually go back and forth between this and your page, there are options on the viewer page screen to preview the page. So as you make changes to the page, then it will update the preview, which I typed that terribly, but. And then there's also the option to view full screen preview. And if you have multiple pages that you work with, then they will show up in this list and you can actually edit any other pages that you might have, or you can delete a page that you no longer use. And so this is kind of where the power of customization comes in on Remote Falcon, is just your ability to modify these HTML templates or custom HTML code to create your own page. Now you can see here that it shows this graphic that says "See you soon," but we don't actually see our sequences on here, and that is because under viewer control we have an option to turn viewer control on and off. And so if we turn viewer control on, then we see some other sections in here that show what's currently playing, what's coming up next, how many songs are currently in the queue, and then which songs are in there, as well as the list of sequences that we have. And so this is what your viewer would actually choose from. And so while we're on the settings page, I'm going to run through some of these settings so that we can get more familiar with how these work. So as we saw, viewer control enables and disables the ability for a viewer to actually make requests or vote on a song. Our viewer control mode, there are two options. So we have jukebox and we have voting. So jukebox is just like a jukebox would work. So a viewer makes a request and it gets put into a queue, and every request made after that, it queues up. And so it will go through one request at a time before moving on to the next one. And then voting has a different layout where your viewer would select a sequence and it would add votes to that specific sequence. And when the current sequence is done playing, then it will go and it'll fetch the highest voted sequence and it will start playing that. And then under viewer page, we already covered which viewer page is active. This you shouldn't have to worry about unless you're self-hosting, so I'm not going to cover that. The viewer page title is what shows up, and I don't know if you can see it up here. It's blocked by a bar for me, but it's what shows up on the top of the tab or in the browser. And so you can name this whatever you want, and it'll update the tab up at the top. The viewer page icon URL. So that's the little icon that shows up. You can add a link to an icon URL that you want to use if your show has a logo or something. And then lastly, we have this make it snow, which is Halloween. Where I live, it doesn't usually snow for Halloween, but if I turn this on, then you'll notice it just adds this snow effect to the page. And so just an easy way to get a nice little effect on your page if you want it. And then we'll get into the actual jukebox and voting specific options.
Hey,
So
Jane,
yes, go ahead.
can you change the color of the snow for Halloween?
You cannot. So this effect is just pretty static. So it's always the same when you turn it on. But there are quite a few pages that have done the same effect. But instead of snow, it's something like skeletons or pumpkins or something that's coming down. And so you can definitely add your own to it. But for the built-in effect, it's just simply white snowfall. Okay. So back on our jukebox settings, this first setting is our jukebox queue depth. Excuse me. What this means is when viewers are making requests, if you don't want your jukebox queue to get out of control, like 30, 40 songs in your jukebox queue, then you can set a maximum number of sequences that can be in the queue at any given time. So if I say I only want 3 sequences to be in the queue at once, then it updates this particular text here to say that requests are limited to 3 songs. So you can see there's currently 2 songs selected. And so if I selected 1, then it would work because there's 3. But if I tried to more, then it's going to tell me the queue is full. And the viewer just has to wait for that queue to lower before they make their request. And so this is a good way to just kind of put a cap on how many sequences can be queued at a given point. And while we have sequences in here, you'll notice at the top, there's this button where we can view the queue. And you can see from a control panel perspective which sequences are in the queue. If you decide you don't want one to play, you can delete a specific sequence from the list and it will remove it from the queue, or you can choose to delete all the requests. And that will completely clear out everything from the queue. Okay, the next one, which is a sequence request limit, might be a little bit difficult to understand at first, but this was put in place to prevent the same sequence from being requested over and over again. So what this says is, I'm just going to put in a value of 2 here, and then just demonstrate how that particular configuration works. So if I make a request for the green pinwheel, and then I make a request for cyan pinwheel. If I try to place a request for green pinwheel again, it's going to tell me that that song has already been requested. And so what this 2 is doing is when a viewer makes a request, it's going to the 2 most recent requests that were made. And it's saying if that requested sequence is within the 2 most recent that were requested, we're not going to allow it. And so it puts kind of a buffer between sequences. Otherwise, viewers can select the same sequence back to back multiple times. And so before I can select green, I have to select something different. So now my 2 most recent sequences are yellow and cyan, which means I can, except my queue is full, I can put green back into the queue because there are 2 sequences separating the green pinwheel sequence. So this 2 just ensures that there's 2 unique sequences separating all of your requests. And so it's a good way to keep somebody from just spamming your jukebox and doing the same request over and over. And then under voting, so just a couple options here. You can turn it on to prevent a viewer from voting multiple times during a round. A round is just a sequence. So as a sequence is playing and votes are being tallied up, that's considered 1 round. And so if you don't want the same viewer sitting there racking up votes on a sequence, then you can turn this on and it'll prevent them from voting more than 1 time in a given round. And then the ability to reset the votes after every round. So by default, during voting, when the highest vote is placed, all of the votes for the sequences that didn't win will still be there. And so to show an example, so if we have, nope, voting is not going to work for me. That's good enough. Okay, so that I will have to look into. But let's say blue pinwheel has 10 votes and green pinwheel has 5 votes. Blue pinwheel ends up winning the round. Then if you don't reset the votes, then green pinwheel will start the next voting round with the 5 votes that it had from the previous one. So all votes will carry over unless you tell Remote Falcon to reset everything back to 0 after each round. And so it kind of gives you control over how those votes are treated for each one. And then finally, we have interaction safeguards. Not going to go into this one a whole lot either, but at a high level, you have the ability to play a PSA. So a lot of people like to put stuff in their show that says, please turn off your headlights, please keep your volume down, stuff like that. So if you enable this PSA option, then you can choose which sequence you want to use as your PSA and how often it plays. So if I select this and I put 2, then after every 2 sequences or every 2 sequence requests, it's going to drop that PSA in there. And that's to ensure that if people are just constantly hammering your jukebox and you're voting and your PSA isn't getting a chance to play, then this will automatically insert it into the queue or into the voting so it gets a chance to be played. And then check viewer present is a good option to ensure that the viewer is actually at your show when they make a request. And so there's a couple different options you can do.
Hey,
you can, yes.
I apologize. I was double muted on that previous option where you're going to sneak a PSA in. What are the chances that Remote Falcon would play your PSA, come out of request mode, and the next thing in the queue was your PSA?
Yeah, that's a great question. That can happen.
Okay.
but it can be alleviated by using a managed PSA.
Okay.
So what managed PSA does is it, like it says, it gives Remote Falcon the ability to fully manage the PSA and control when it plays, even if no requests or votes are being made. So when this is turned on, what will happen is Remote Falcon will keep track of how many sequences are playing from your normal scheduled show, and it will automatically insert the PSA based on the frequency.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So that means you don't actually have to have the PSA as part of your
Primary
show playlist. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And so this gives Remote Falcon full control over when the PSA actually plays.
Nice.
Yep.
Is that new?
This was a new feature as of last year. It was kind of buggy. A lot of people had issues with the PSA getting stuck in a loop. And so that should be sorted out for this year.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Back on the viewer present. So we have an option to display a code. So if you wanted your viewer to enter a specific code before they're able to make a request, then you can see now this box shows up here. So if I go to change back to jukebox, if I come in here and I try to make a request, it's not going to let me because it needs a code before I can do that. Once I put in the code, then it adds the request. And so that's just one of the safeguards. The other one, which isn't manual for the viewer, is GPS location. So when this is enabled, you can see I got this pop-up that is asking for my location. So if I don't share my location, or if I'm outside a specific radius of the show, then it will not allow me to place a request. And you can specify that radius as well in miles. And so this is saying if the viewer is more than 1 mile outside of that radius of my show, then they're not going to be able to place a request. And so this just ensures that the viewer is actually at your show location. And then hide sequence after play is kind of just an extra safeguard in addition to your jukebox request limit. So if a sequence is requested and played, then you can tell that sequence to hide for 2 more sequences played before it shows back up in your list. And so if you don't even want your viewer to see it, then you can hide it from the list completely when it's played. Craig, if the viewer initially selects never allow location, how do they change that after? So that is going to be browser specific. On Chrome, I know you can go in and you can update your settings afterward, but the average user, it's probably going to be cumbersome for them to do that. And so if they don't, and this has come up before, it's happened a lot where viewers have said, I can't make requests, and it's just simply because they, denied location when it showed up on the page. And so if they don't accept location, unfortunately, that's going to happen.
I actually put it on my website. Please enable locations on your device.
Yes, that's also a good idea. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's a good call out. If you're going to enable location, maybe put something on there when they're there to just let them know why it's being used. And that's kind of a really fast run through of the settings. And so we're going to go back over to the sequences page. And do you have to enter the code for each request? Yes, you do. So before you make a request, you have to put in the code on there. I don't know. I don't think the code gets erased when you make the request, so it might stay in there. I'm not positive on that.
James, in
Yes.
a lot of the browsers, if there's a little icon next to the web address, and if you click that, that will deal with your permissions. And not every browser, but that's like 85 or 90% of the browsers will be similar to the way that one's handled.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure how this looks on mobile device. I do know in normal browser, like you mentioned, you do have the ability to, if for some reason you don't allow location the first time, then you can go in and allow it, update it to allow location after that. Yep, that's a great call out. Okay, so we do have several things here. So the sequence name is the same way that it looked in Remote Falcon in our playlist whenever we synced it. But we might not want it to say blue pinwheel for the viewer. And so clicking on that, we have the option to add a display name. So we might want to say, we're going to call this an awesome blue effect. And when I go back to my viewer page, you can see rather than blue pinwheel, it's updated to a different name. And so that's helpful because a lot of times our sequences, what we put into Falcon Player or Xschedule, they're not very reader friendly. And so this allows you to modify how that sequence appears. The artist, if you type in an artist name, then it will actually show up as a different style. And all of this can be, all of the styles and everything can be modified in the viewer page HTML. Not going to cover all that because it would just take a long time to go through everything. The image URL, if you put in an image URL, then it will display an image to the left of the sequence. And I don't have a URL handy, so I'm not going to put one in. The category, so you have the ability to categorize sequences. So this was a big request that came up last year, I think, where a lot of people wanted to be able to say, hey, this sequence is new for 2024. And so if I add a category to a sequence, then you can see that it shows up for that specific sequence. But I can actually add this same category to multiple sequences. And so you can see it's updated the category here. And for every sequence that I add this category to, it puts them into a group. So you can see it kind of separated here a little bit. So it groups all the categories, all the sequences together. So if you have, say you have rock sequences or country or traditional, then you can, especially if you have a lot of sequences, then you can kind of put them into to specific orders. In addition to that, you can also create sequence groups. So what a sequence group does, and you notice we don't have any. Let's say that you have a sequence that has an intro to it, and you don't want your viewers to select the intro separate from the sequence. So you can say, I'm going to have something called intro and sequence. Then with that group created, I can add blue pinwheel to that group. And then I can say, we'll pretend that blue pinwheel is an intro. And then I'll have green pinwheel. And what will happen is on your page, it will combine those two sequences or more. You could have 3 or 4 sequences as part of a group. And so when the viewer, I'm going to clear this queue out real quick, just to, when the viewer selects intro and sequence, that said it was already created. I'll have to look into that as well. When the viewer selects intro and sequence, it'll actually put the blue and green back to back so that those sequences will always play together. And so that's a way to put different sequences into group if you don't want them to be played individually. And then you have the ability to manage those groups. You can see which sequences are part of it, and you can delete the sequence group altogether. I'm going to remove them from here. And then we have some option. Yes, go ahead.
We're about that 10-minute mark.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to try to go. So I didn't do the background because I have this set up behind me. I'm actually going to turn it on. So I have this going. That's going to play a pink and orange on the show. But if anybody wants to actually go to the page and make a request, and you can see it play on there. That's why I didn't have the background on mine. I forgot I had that back there. Cool. So I'm just about wrapped up here, and I'll save time for questions. So some of the other options you have here for sequences, if somebody wants to see a sequence play, maybe a friend or a neighbor comes over, and you don't want them to have to wait, like you have a queue or votes going, then you can click play on any one of these sequences, and it will automatically add it to the top of the queue. So it'll override the entire queue so that it will play next. So you can think of it kind of like an owner override there. As I mentioned before, you can play PSA sequences, but you may not want your viewer actually voting on it or requesting it. So you have a visibility option. So you can choose to hide specific sequences from the list altogether, and they won't show up in there. And then you can also delete a sequence. There's some options up here to sort alphabetically, but you can also drag and drop if you want to have some sort of different sorting. If you're using categories, even if there's sequences between them that aren't categorized, it will still keep them together. So the category always kind of overrides the sequence ordering that you have here. Okay. Now back on the dashboard, you can see we've had several requests that were made. So we've had, 23 viewers on the show. We've had 10 requests that were made, and you can see a breakdown of which sequences were requested. So yellow was requested 3 times, and so on. And then real quick, before I go to questions, the way it works in Falcon Player is when your normal show is playing and a request is made, you can see it just switched over to the Remote Falcon playlist. So it will, when it plays a request, it'll switch over to the Remote Falcon playlist. It'll play through the request, and it'll continue to play through all of the requests until the queue is empty or there are no more votes. When the queue is empty and there's no votes, then it goes back to your normal scheduled show, and it just picks up where it left off. And so that way there's always something playing. Can you download or print the show? You might have to clarify what you mean by that. Oh, you mean if you're talking about the stats, you can. So you have the ability to set, your date range on your stats that you can see, and whatever date range you have set here, you can download everything to an Excel file, and so you can keep that. They do automatically reset after 18 months, so I give you a year and a half to kind of download them, and so that way you can see what those most popular sequences were. There's a couple other links here for documentation and stuff. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I think I covered everything for account settings, so I think we're good there. Can you set a time span? Oh, yeah, sorry. I also needed to cover this real quick. So if you were in Dan's presentation earlier, he was talking about FPP commands. When you download the Remote Falcon plugin, there will be a list of commands that you can use. And what's really nice about these is especially the turn viewer control on and off. So what you can do is you can go into your schedule and you can say at a specific time before your show actually starts, you want to run a command to turn your viewer control on. And then after your show playlist is done running, then you would have one last command that you would run to turn viewer control off. And so what this does is before your show starts, turn on viewer control so your viewers can do their thing. Show runs, requests are being made. And then as soon as your show's done, turn viewer control off. Another good thing to add at the end is purging the queue or resetting all the votes. So you can turn off all the requests and then clear everything out so your show doesn't run for hours past its end time. Okay. I promise. I think that might be it. I don't know. There's a lot to cover in the span of 45 minutes. Okay, I'm going to look at a couple of these questions in chat. What's the best way to collaborate? GitHub issues? Yeah, Discord's not available anymore. In Remote Falcon, there is this work item. So GitHub is the best way. The Facebook group is probably the #1 way to do it. But there is a Remote Falcon GitHub area where you can go and make a feature request or a bug report. You can also add to the playlist lead in and lead out. You can. The only problem with adding it to the playlist lead in or out is if you have a bunch of requests and it goes back to your normal show, your lead out is not going to play until it reaches the end of the show. And so if it passes your show in time, then there's a chance that the viewer control might never be turned off. And so it's safer typically to schedule it than it is to put it in your lead in or lead out. But it is still an option if you want to do that. Last year we used Xscheduler, some of the sequence pros. I will have to look into Xschedule. I don't actually maintain that part of it. So Keith Wesley actually did that. But I do plan on working more on the Xschedule part of it this year, but I'll definitely look into that. Download your stats for all Remote Falcon. So this is only going to download your stats. I did share in the Facebook group all of the stats across every show. So that way people could see what other shows, sequences were being requested on other shows, which was a pretty cool thing to see. Do you anticipate Remote Falcon will be more stable? You had to go there. Yes, I do. So what I did, for those who want a little bit more of a technical background, so Remote Falcon runs on Kubernetes. Everything was refactored this year to use GraphQL and Mongo, so everything is faster, and I refactored a lot of things. I also split out all of the services that are used so that each individual piece can be scaled on its own. So the control panel stuff that you see here and everything that runs the viewer page stuff and everything that runs the plugin is all separate. And you can actually see that here. So you can see I have control panel, the plugins, the UI, the viewer, everything is its own separate thing so I can scale it as needed. How do the viewers know every okay, looks like somebody's responding to that. Oh, I'm not interested in having viewers vote, but I'd love to be able to use an interface to show the playlist and what's playing next. You can do that. You just have to modify the page, right? So you would find the section that has the playlist where you actually select from your playlist, and you just get rid of that. And so that still allows you to see everything that's currently playing, but your viewers won't actually be able to select anything. Header on, do you plan to have a header on the groups? I'm not sure what. Oh, I think I know what you're saying. Yeah, so that's not something that you're able to do just yet, but and then the last one, charging for voting. I've been asked about this a lot, actually. It's not as straightforward as it sounds, because I would have to, I'd have to integrate with all sorts of donation platforms to say if a specific donation was made to this show to unlock the feature set. What a lot of people do is they just put it on their viewer page, that they take donations for a specific charity or something. But at this time, I just don't have anything in the works for charity in order to unlock the ability to vote or request. Okay, another video covering voting versus jukebox. So I do also have a YouTube channel, Remote Falcon. I have some stuff up there, but I just haven't had the time to put more content on there. That is going to be a focus for quality and stability. Was my focus for this year. Because if you use Remote Falcon last year, on Christmas Eve, we had some issues where it was just a massive number of users, and we had some problems. So my focus this year was on quality and stability, making sure that that regardless of how many people are using Remote Falcon, we can, it can stay up. And my focus for next year is going to be more on content and like training stuff. Deep dives is what I call them. So deep dives into the HTML and different feature sets and stuff like that. So like I said, the Facebook group is also another great place to go to. Okay, yeah, that's all I got.
Falcon show map.
With that, I'd like to say thank you, James. Great presentation. These will be recorded and uploaded to the VCS YouTube channel. We can continue questions for a couple minutes if James wants before the next presentation gets ready. But with that, I'm going to stop recording and thank you all for coming to this presentation.
Thank you.